So I was born in Michigan, but at age 5, my family and I moved down to South Florida, to Miami, and then to Fort Lauderdale. So I've been a South Floridian all my life. I have the blessing of coming from a very Catholic family. So, since I was a kid, since I was a baby, my parents brought me and my brothers to Mass every Sunday. We prayed as a family, we read scripture, we prayed the rosary together. So it was in that Catholic ambiance that I grew up. I was never drawn to the priesthood as a kid. And actually, I remember being very small, like 10 years old, and I used to look at priests and wonder in my heart, why would anyone in their right mind want to be a priest? Like I don't know. I didn't see it, I didn't understand it. And so for me, it was a surprise when later on in life, much later, I received a calling to follow the Lord as a priest, as a religious brother as well. Growing up, I was more familiar with diocesan priests because, those were the priests that were at the parishes that I would go to. There were some Carmelite priests, but I didn't really see any Franciscan priests, and definitely not any Capuchins, you know. So I wasn't too familiar with all the different branches of the Franciscans. So I had an encounter with the Lord many years ago, and it was at a time in my life when I was at a rock bottom. The Lord brought this book into my life called The Imitation of Christ, and by Thomas Kempis. And just flipping through this book, which is a Christian classic, the Lord spoke to my heart and basically showed me that I wasn't living my life in the right way. Even though I was Catholic, cradle Catholic, even though I went to Mass on Sundays and, went to confession every now and then, I didn't really have a relationship with the Lord. And I really didn't know Jesus, as a person. I was just very, let's say, religious. I went through the motions of religion. And so just flipping through the pages of that book in a matter of probably a minute or two, the Lord spoke to my heart, and he said to me, "What does it profit a man to gain the world but lose his soul?" Which is from scripture. And that really got me to reflect on my life, reflect on how I was living it, where I was going, and got me to meditate also on my death, which we could die at any moment. And so, in short, that book brought me to surrender my life to the Lord, to Jesus Christ. And then it was from there that my life changed. My life was transformed. I received, first and foremost, the peace of the Lord, this peace I had never experienced before in my life, even though I had gone to church all my life. And my mom had, like, dragged me and my brothers to, like, youth retreats and stuff like that to try to encounter the Lord. But that was the moment when I really encountered Jesus. And it was just so beautiful, that experiencing that peace. I experienced a lot of healing as well. The Lord healed me from depression that I had suffered from childhood, really. And he also healed me from a digestive and bladder issue that I had. So that was when I saw firsthand, like, the power of God. And I was just, like, taken aback. And within, I want to say, about 2 weeks of that encounter with the Lord is when I just had um, this knowledge within me, this interior knowledge that the Lord was calling me to something greater, to which later I discerned, priesthood and then religious life. So within a year of that experience, I applied to the seminary, and I entered the seminary in Miami. So I was a seminarian there for about 5.5 years. And all the while I was going through seminary, there was something unsettling within me, because even though I was drawn toward the priesthood, I was also drawn to religious life, specifically to Franciscan life, to follow the Lord in a fraternity, in a Franciscan spirituality, and with a deeper life of prayer. Diocesan priesthood is very active ministry. A lot of times those priests they're lone rangers. They're out there on their own, so they don't have that fraternal support. And because of the active ministry, sometimes it gets hard to get your prayer in. And for me, prayer is like essential. Ever since that encounter with the Lord, like I've known deep down inside the importance of a prayer life, of that intimacy with Jesus. And so, after 5.5 years, I left the seminary, and by God's grace, I did get my degrees in theology and philosophy. And I kept on searching. In the meantime, the Lord called me to minister to the youth, through Catholic music that I was making, and through sharing my testimony. So I did that for a few years as a Catholic rapper. And eventually, one day going to daily Mass, I saw a Capuchin Franciscan friar there celebrating Mass. And I was like, whoa, where did they come from? I didn't know they were here. And so it was Father Robert Williams. And I met him, and that began, that got the ball rolling. Eventually, he led me to the vocations director, and I started discerning with the community there in Miami, visiting them, praying vespers and having dinner with them, and just getting to know the community. And so that lasted about a year. That process of like visiting their friary in Miami, and also I did 2 come and see weekends in Delaware, with the Stigmata province. And so, I just felt like God was opening a door for me, and leading me to a way of life where I could serve Him, with my gifts and talents, and also encounter the Lord in a deeper way through that prayer life, through fraternity and stuff. So that's pretty much how I was led to the Capuchins. I think that definitely the fraternal life is one of the essential components, that draws me and draws many men to this type of life. To be able to live in community with like-minded individuals who seek holiness, they seek the Lord, and provide that moral support. I think that's so essential, so important. For me, also the prayer life, the possibility, the environment of being able to enter into a deeper intimacy with the Lord in prayer, that also draws me a lot. So I want to say it's both fraternal life and the prayer life that draw me to Capuchin life. I honestly, I want to serve the Lord in whatever capacity He would like me to serve Him in. At this moment, I do feel that He's calling me to the priesthood. What specifically, what type of work within the priesthood and religious life He would like me to do, I'll leave that up to Him. I just want to follow His will. I think another thing that drew me to the Capuchins is their work with the poor, their work with what a lot of people deem the lowest of society, the marginalized, the homeless. That has been something that has really tugged at my heart. And so to see the Franciscans, and especially the Capuchins, working with the poor, that has really drawn me. Also, I want to say just the Franciscan spirituality, being able to follow the Lord in the footsteps of Saint Francis, in the model of Saint Francis, and specifically in the Capuchin Franciscan model, that also draws me a lot. One of the blessings of religious life and one of the struggles of religious life is fraternity, because it brings joys, it brings a lot of laughter, it brings, good times, and it brings healthy challenges. Sometimes, think about it, you're living in a house or a monastery or friary with different personalities. You're not always going to agree on every issue or whatever, but at the end of the day, the Lord calls us to love one another. He mandates us to love one another. And so I think that as long as you're walking in that path of charity and mercy and forgiveness, you can get along. But that's definitely been one of the blessings and challenges. I want to say the first thing for anyone that is discerning this way of life is to have a prayer life, to seek the Lord above all things, to seek His will. And that would include, going to daily mass, praying the rosary daily, going to adoration as much as you can, daily if you can, to try to see what the Lord speaks to your heart. The other thing that I would say that is very important is to get a spiritual director, a priest, preferably, who can guide you, a holy priest who can guide you, who can give you advice and journey with you as you discern this calling. And then the final thing I would say, with the help of that spiritual director, would be to contact the vocations director of whatever community you feel God is calling you to, and begin that process, because that vocation director, hopefully he will also guide you. But these three steps, 3 or 4 steps, I think are important for anyone discerning. Would I do anything differently? I want to say from my first time around, going to the seminary, to the Diocesan Seminary, I learned from the way I did things, and I saw the importance of getting a spiritual director. When I first entered the seminary, I didn't initially get a spiritual director. I just went into the seminary. And so I realized that it is important to have a holy man or woman of God guiding you. And so I would say get a spiritual director. Okay, well, I've been really happy these last 6 months, here in the monastery, discerning this life. I look forward to what God has for me in the future. I'd like to, of course, continue discerning this life, and I do feel a calling to it. And I just want to encourage everyone watching this video to give their lives to the Lord, whether that be a calling to religious life, to priesthood, to marriage, just follow the Lord. That's the most important thing. We got to be holy. We got to get to heaven.